the vast Mongolian steppes, where history's greatest land empire once stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. The Mongol saga goes beyond conquest, revealing cultural exchange, innovation, and trade networks that connected East and West centuries before our modern era. Let us journey to the windswept grasslands where Temujin, the boy born clutching a blood clot, rose from poverty to become Genghis Khan, the world ruler. In the harsh wilderness of the Mongolian plateau, around 1162, a child was born to Yasuge, a minor chieftain of the Borjigan clan, and his wife, Hoilun. They named him Temujin, after a Tatar chief captured by his father. The Mongolia of Temujin's birth was not a unified nation but a patchwork quilt of nomadic tribes. Tatars, Merkits, Naimans, Karyots, and dozens more, locked in endless cycles of raids, alliances, and betrayals. Life on the steppe was brutally difficult. Winters brought temperatures plummeting to -40 degrees, while summer droughts could decimate the herds upon which survival depended. In this unforgiving landscape, only the strongest and most adaptable endured. From his earliest days, Temujin learned the skills of a nomadic warrior, riding at a full gallop before he could walk, shooting a bow from horseback with deadly accuracy, and enduring days without food or shelter. But even by the harsh standards of steppe life, the boy's childhood proved exceptionally difficult. When he was just 9 years old, his father took him to the family of his betrothed, Bertay, to arrange their marriage and left him there to be raised by his future in-laws, as was the custom among Mongols. On the journey back, the chieftain accepted food from Tatars who recognized him as an enemy and poisoned him. Dying, he sent a trusted companion to bring his son back to the family. Following his father's death, Temujin's clan members abandoned his family, refusing to submit to a child. The deepest water dries up, the brightest stone crumbles, they told his mother, taking even the ancestral herds that were the family's sole source of sustenance. Left without protection or resources, the widow and her children were forced to survive on roots, berries, and small game, living as outcasts on the fringes of tribal society. When the master dies, the servants scatter like smoke, says an old Mongolian proverb. So it was for this abandoned family. This period of crushing poverty forged Temujin's character. With his mother and siblings, he learned to hunt marmots and fish, to fashion clothes from stitched-together field mouse skins, and to find strength in family loyalty when all outside support had vanished. His resilient mother taught her children that their only hope for survival lay in perfect unity. Together, you can withstand any foe, but a single arrow breaks easily. Tragedy, however, continued to stalk the young boy. When he was about 12 years old, he killed his half-brother, Begter, in a dispute over hunting spoils, establishing his dominance within the family but living with the grave consequences of fratricide, one of the gravest crimes in Mongol society. Soon after this incident, disaster struck again. The Taijut clan, former followers of his father, captured Temujin and held him in a wooden collar designed for slaves. For days he was paraded from yurt to yurt, a spectacle of curiosity and mockery. But one night, seeing the guards distracted during a celebration, the captive broke his wooden collar against a rock and fled into the night. A Taijut pursuer spotted him hiding in the shallow waters of a river, but inexplicably chose not to reveal his location. This mysterious act of mercy would be long remembered by Temujin, who later rewarded the man, named Sorgan Shira, when he rose to power. Even in these darkest moments, the future ruler was learning what acts of kindness and cruelty would shape his own leadership. After escaping captivity, he reunited with his family and soon set off to find his fiancée. Their marriage forged an alliance with her tribe, the conquests, giving him his first political connection and the beginnings of a power base. As a wedding gift, he received a magnificent black sable fur coat, a treasure he would soon employ with strategic purpose. Understanding that on the steppe, a man without allies is a man waiting for death, Temujin set out to find Togrul, the Khan of the Karyots and sworn brother of his late father. Presenting the valuable sable coat as a gift, the young leader received Togrul's promise of support, famously declaring, "I will be your right hand, and together we will unite the peoples who live in felt tents." This alliance proved timely. Shortly after his marriage, warriors from the Merkit tribe, enemies of his father, who had once kidnapped his mother, raided his camp and took his new wife captive. Seeking revenge with the support of the Khan of the Karygids and the help of his childhood friend and future rival, Jamuka, Temujin launched his first military campaign, successfully rescuing her after months of captivity. The woman's return was joyous but complicated. She was pregnant, and the child, Jochi, would always carry the stigma of uncertain paternity. Yet, Temujin acknowledged the boy as his own, demonstrating a pragmatism regarding family and loyalty that would later extend to his empire building. Throughout his life, competence and loyalty would matter more to him than birth or lineage, a revolutionary concept in a deeply hierarchical tribal society. Following the campaign against the Merkits, Temujin's reputation grew. He demonstrated an unprecedented ability to attract followers not through tribal ties but through personal loyalty. Breaking with tradition, he promoted men based on merit rather than kinship, offering advancement to anyone who proved their worth, even former enemies. This radical meritocracy drew talented and ambitious individuals to his banner. Notably, members of prestigious clans who saw opportunity in his rising power. His growing influence eventually strained relations with his sworn brother and ally, Jamuka. The two men represented competing models of leadership. Jamuka adhered to a traditional aristocratic approach, while Temujin forged a new system based on personal loyalty and merit. As their paths diverged around 1182, their followers chose sides, initiating a protracted struggle for supremacy. This conflict would last for nearly 2 decades, punctuated by battles, betrayals, and shifting alliances that gradually united the Mongol tribes under Temujin's banner. In 1186, supporters of his rival proclaimed Jamuka as Khan, an act that clarified the stakes. Only one man could ultimately rule the Mongol tribes. Throughout this period, Temujin displayed the exceptional strategic abilities that would later reshape continents. After a significant defeat at the Battle of the 13 Wings, he retreated to regroup rather than mount a desperate defense. He systematically forged alliances with his opponent's enemies, including the powerful Karygids under their Khan, an old ally of his father. As these relationships grew strained, as they did with Togrul around 1203, Temujin showed ruthlessness in eliminating former supporters who became obstacles. By 1206, after decades of warfare, alliance building, and political maneuvering, he had achieved what no one before him had: the unification of all Mongol and Turkic tribes of the steppe. At a great assembly called a Kurultai, held at the sacred mountain of Burkan Khaldun, the assembled tribal leaders lifted him onto a felt carpet and proclaimed him Genghis Khan, the oceanic ruler, supreme leader of the united Mongol nation. The man once abandoned to die on the steppe now stood as the undisputed ruler of the largest confederation of nomadic peoples in history. His former sworn brother, Jamuka, finally captured after years of conflict, refused Temujin's offer of reconciliation, instead asking for a noble death without bloodshed. Honoring this request, the new Khan ordered him executed by having his back broken, a death befitting a prince, and buried his remains with honor, a final respect to the man who had been his greatest friend and most dangerous rival. At the Kurultai, Genghis Khan immediately set about transforming this tribal confederation into a disciplined state. He established the Yasa, a code of laws that set standard statutes for all tribes. He created a decimal military system, organized into units of 10, 100, thousands, and 10,000 warriors called tumans, abolishing traditional tribal groupings. He founded a rudimentary bureaucracy and a corps of relay riders, the Yam, who could quickly transmit his commands across the vast territories now under his control. Perhaps most significantly, he dismantled the old tribal aristocracy, replacing it with a new elite based on loyalty and service to him. The sons of defeated chieftains were executed or marginalized, while loyal followers, regardless of origin, were given positions of power. He even created a personal guard unit, the Keshig, whose members would later become his most trusted generals and administrators. At 44 years old, Genghis Khan had completed the first phase of his remarkable journey, from outcast to emperor. But he was not content with ruling only the Mongols. Standing before the assembled leaders at the Kurultai, he declared, "I have risen from the dirt to the golden throne. I intend to bring the whole world under the hoofbeats of my horses." The assembled warriors, hardened by decades of intertribal warfare, now looked beyond the steppe to the settled civilizations that surrounded them, to the rich but fragmented Middle Kingdom of China to the south, to the Muslim empires of the West, and even further to the distant kingdoms of Europe. With a unified people at his back and a military machine honed by years of conflict, the Khan prepared to launch the greatest series of conquests the world had ever seen. The nomad had become emperor, and the world was about to discover the terrifying efficiency of the Mongol war machine. As Genghis Khan gazed at the horizon, the vast empires beyond the steppe had no inkling of the coming storm that would forever alter the course of human history. As the dust settled after the great Kurultai of 1206, Genghis Khan stood on the precipice of a new era. The unification of the Mongol tribes was not an end, but a beginning. With the steppe now united beneath his banner, the newly proclaimed Khan turned his gaze outward to the settled civilizations that for centuries had looked down upon the nomadic peoples as barbarians. Little did these kingdoms know that from the crucible of tribal warfare had emerged the most destructive military force the medieval world would ever encounter. The army that Genghis Khan unleashed upon the world was not merely a collection of skilled warriors. It was a revolutionary military system designed for conquest on an unprecedented scale. Every aspect of this force was forged through a combination of steppe traditions honed to perfection and innovations that would forever transform warfare. At its core, the steppe army was built around the mounted archer, perhaps the most formidable warrior before the modern era. Born in the saddle, these children learned to ride before they could walk, and began training with the bow from early childhood. By adulthood, a warrior could hit a target at a full gallop, unleash multiple arrows in rapid succession, and maneuver with a precision that infantry-focused armies could scarcely comprehend. The composite bow they wielded was a technological marvel, a multi-layered construction of wood, horn, and sinew that could outrange most contemporary weapons. The draw strength of the composite Mongol bow exceeded 73 kilograms, with an effective range reaching nearly 275 meters and beyond. These archers could pepper enemy formations long before their foes could retaliate. Each fighter carried 2 or 3 bows and up to 300 arrows of various types, including specialized armor-piercing shafts for heavily armored opponents. Genghis Khan organized this deadly force into a decimal system that abolished traditional tribal affiliations. Warriors were grouped into units of 10, 100, thousands, and 10,000. This organization facilitated precise control and communication across vast distances and complex battlefields. Perhaps most crucially, it created a meritocracy where leadership was based on skill and loyalty, not birth. A revolutionary concept that allowed the most talented fighters to rise through the ranks regardless of their background. Discipline was absolute. The penalty for desertion, failure to recover a fallen comrade, or misallocation of spoils was death. This harsh discipline, however, was balanced by generous rewards. These warriors received a larger share of the spoils than soldiers in almost any contemporary army, fostering intense loyalty and motivation. As one Persian chronicler noted, "Each man is worth 10 of their enemies, because they all profit when they win, and all die when they lose." While the tactical prowess of the steppe army was unmatched, Genghis Khan understood that wars were won in the mind. As much on the battlefield as on the battlefield, he elevated psychological warfare to an art form, using terror as a strategic weapon with chilling precision. Before advancing on major states, Mongol forces would devastate those small settlements that dared to resist, while those who surrendered without a fight were usually spared. The first settled civilization to face the full might of Genghis Khan's united army was the Western Xia, a sophisticated Buddhist kingdom controlling vital trade routes between China and Central Asia. In 1205, shortly before the Kurultai that proclaimed him Genghis Khan, Temujin began raiding Tangut territory, testing their defenses and reactions. The full invasion began in 1207, and it revealed a pattern that would characterize many future campaigns. Initial resistance was met with overwhelming force. As the Tanguts rejected the Khan's demands for submission and tribute, his forces systematically destroyed their fortified cities, diverting rivers to flood defenses and employing Chinese siege engines against major fortifications. By 1210, the ruler of Western Xia capitulated, accepting vassal status and providing troops for future campaigns. With his first conquest secured, Genghis Khan immediately turned his attention to a far grander prize, the Jin dynasty, which ruled northern China. The campaign against the Jin began in 1211 with a 3-pronged invasion that caught Jin defenses off guard. Despite commanding a much larger population and resources, including a standing army of over 1 million soldiers, the Jin proved incapable of matching the mobility and tactical brilliance of the steppe warriors. In the Battle of Huling, A Jin army of over 500,000 men faced approximately 100,000 of Genghis Khan's warriors. Through a series of feigned retreats and flanking maneuvers, the nomadic forces divided the Jin armies and destroyed them piecemeal, killing an estimated 60,000 Jin soldiers with minimal Mongol losses. Following this devastating victory, the Khan's troops systematically reduced Jin cities over the next few years. The Jin capital, Zhengdu, fell in 1215 after a brutal siege. When the starving inhabitants finally surrendered, the conquerors executed all officials and military officers before meticulously looting the city. Refugees reported that the streets were slick with the fat of the massacre that followed. While the final conquest of the Jin would wait until after Genghis Khan's death, the empire was mortally weakened by his campaigns. One of the most remarkable aspects of Genghis Khan's generalship was his ability to coordinate military operations on multiple distant fronts simultaneously. Even while conducting his campaign against the Jin, he dispatched forces westward to conquer the Karakitai Empire, which controlled much of Central Asia. Led by his brilliant general Jibi the Arrow, the Khan's troops invaded Karakitai territory in 1216. Rather than relying solely on military might, Jebe exploited internal divisions, forging alliances with disgruntled vassal rulers and religious minorities oppressed under Karakitai rule. This combination of military pressure and political manipulation led to the swift collapse of the empire by 1218, adding vast territories to the growing domain of the steppe conquerors. The conquest of the Karakitai had profound strategic implications. It extended Genghis Khan's control to the borders of the powerful Khwarezmian Empire, giving his realm control over the lucrative east-west trade that had flowed for centuries. Merchants who had previously paid taxes to multiple authorities now dealt with a single power, heralding the coming of the Pax Mongolica, which would later connect distant parts of Eurasia. Behind the dramatic battles and sieges lay perhaps the greatest military innovation of these nomadic conquerors, a logistical system far ahead of its time. While contemporary armies relied on slow-moving supply trains, vulnerable to interception, the steppe forces lived off the land with remarkable efficiency. Each warrior on campaign typically carried a supply of dried meat, dried milk or curd, a little flour, or grain for mush and porridge, and other preserved foods that could sustain him for days without resupply. In emergencies, they drank blood from the veins of their horses, carefully making small incisions that did not cause permanent harm to their most valuable military asset. Intelligence gathering was another crucial component of the Khan's military success. Before major campaigns, Genghis Khan dispatched merchants, spies, and diplomatic missions to gather detailed information on potential targets. These intelligence efforts mapped terrain, identified key fortifications, assessed political divisions that could be exploited, and even cataloged the personalities of enemy leaders to predict their reactions. The military prowess of these conquests came at a terrible human cost. Contemporary chroniclers claimed campaigns in northern China reduced the population by tens of millions. While modern historians consider these figures exaggerated, archaeological evidence supports widespread abandonment of previously inhabited areas and significant demographic decline. Beyond the direct casualties of combat, these invasions precipitated famine and disease as agricultural systems collapsed. By 1219, just 13 years after unifying the tribes, Genghis Khan ruled an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of the Islamic world. Western Shah had been subdued, the Jin dynasty was collapsing, and the Karakitai had been absorbed into his burgeoning realm. However, the greatest challenges and most devastating campaigns still lay ahead, as the great Khan marshaled his forces on the borders of the Khwarezmian Empire. In 1218, as Genghis Khan consolidated his power over the conquered lands of northern China and Central Asia, his attention turned west to a new horizon. The vast Khwarezmian Empire lay before him, a powerful Muslim kingdom encompassing the territory of modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and much of Central Asia, ruled by Shah Muhammad II. This was a civilization at the height of its power, rich from its control of the Silk Road, defended by hundreds of thousands of warriors, and adorned with great cities that were once the jewels of Islamic culture and learning. What followed would be one of the most significant clashes in history, a collision between the nomadic war machine of the steppes and an established Islamic empire that would forever change the course of civilization in the Middle East. But unlike many of Genghis Khan's campaigns, this catastrophic war began not with territorial ambition, but with a diplomatic incident that spiraled into one of history's most destructive acts of retribution. Seeking to establish peaceful trade relations, Genghis Khan sent a caravan of 450 merchants to Khwarezm in 1218. With them, he sent a message to Shah Muhammad. "I am the lord of the lands of the rising sun, and you rule the lands of the setting sun. Let us forge a strong treaty of friendship and peace." The Shah initially received this overture with caution, but with apparent interest, sending gifts in return. Soon after, Genghis Khan sent an official diplomatic mission, led by Muslim envoys, to reinforce his peaceful intentions. But in the Khwarezmian border town of Otrar, disaster struck. The governor, known as Inalchuk, or Gayer Khan, accused the merchants of being spies, confiscated their valuable goods, and executed the entire caravan. When the next diplomatic mission arrived to investigate, the Shah executed all but one of the envoys, their beards burned off. A profound insult in Mongol culture. To the Mongols, envoys were sacred and inviolable. Their execution represented not just an insult, but a violation of the order of heaven itself. Upon hearing the news, Genghis Khan reportedly retired alone to a mountaintop for 3 days and nights, communing with the eternal blue sky, before returning with cold purpose. According to Persian chronicles, he declared, "The sovereignty of the city peoples of these territories I shall give to the youngest of my sons, but first I must bring them to such a state that the foals of my horses may gambol in their palaces." The Mongol response would be measured not in rage, but in meticulous preparation. Throughout 1219, Genghis Khan assembled what may have been the largest nomadic army ever created, perhaps 200,000 warriors, drawn from all corners of his growing empire. The great Khan took personal command, bringing his sons Jochi, Chagatai, Ogadai, and Tului to train in the arts of war and conquest. Against this force, Shah Muhammad could field a much larger army, perhaps 400,000 soldiers, but instead of concentrating his numerically superior forces for decisive battles, the Shah made a fatal strategic error. Fearing the Mongols' reputation for warfare, he dispersed his forces to garrison cities throughout his vast empire, allowing the invaders to pick his army apart piece by piece. The invasion began in early 1220, with Mongol forces dividing into multiple columns to overwhelm the Shah's defenses. The city of Otrar, where the initial crime had occurred, fell after a 5-month siege. True to his reputation for precise vengeance, Genghis Khan reserved a special punishment for Inalchuk, the governor responsible for the massacre of the merchants. The man was executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a death that symbolized his greed. But the fall of Otrar was only the beginning. The great cities of Transoxiana, Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench lay in the path of the invaders, each a center of Islamic learning and culture, each protected by formidable walls and numerous soldiers. The fate of these cities revealed the full, horrific efficiency of Mongol warfare. Bukhara, one of the Islamic world's most important cultural centers, first met the Mongol onslaught. Its outer fortifications fell quickly in March 1220. The garrison attempted a breakout but was tracked down and annihilated by Mongol light cavalry. As the city surrendered, Genghis Khan rode his horse into the main mosque, declared himself the scourge of God, and ordered the city's nobles to bring forth their hidden treasures. After meticulously looting Bukhara, the Mongols employed a tactic they would repeat throughout the campaign. They used the city's population as human shields to attack their next target, Samarkand. Witnessing their neighbors being driven before the Mongol army, forced to fill moats with their bodies or attack walls ahead of Mongol troops, had a profound psychological effect on every subsequent city. Samarkand, with its massive walls and garrison of 100,000 soldiers, was considered impregnable. Yet, it fell within days. The city's Turkic mercenaries attempted to surrender separately, but Genghis Khan ordered them executed, reinforcing his message that resistance and betrayal were equally futile. The city's artisans, around 30,000 skilled craftsmen, were deported to Mongolia to serve the growing empire, while many of the remaining inhabitants were killed. As these great cities fell, Shah Muhammad fled westward rather than face the invaders head-on, a decision that demoralized his forces and civilian population. Relentlessly pursued by a special Mongol detachment under Jebe and Subutai, the once mighty ruler was eventually cornered on a small island in the Caspian Sea, where he died in isolation and despair in early 1221. The Shah's death did not slow the Mongol advance. The onslaught became more systematic and devastating. The city of Urgench, Khwarezm's capital, fiercely resisted, fighting street by street against the invaders. Enraged by this unexpected challenge, the Mongols diverted the Amudarya River to flood the city. When it finally fell after a 6-month siege, the retribution was horrific. Contemporary sources claim each Mongol warrior was assigned to personally execute 24 civilians. While such numbers are likely exaggerated, archaeological evidence supports a massive depopulation. The great cultural centers of eastern Persia suffered a similar fate. Merv, Nishapur, and Herat, cities renowned throughout the Islamic world for their libraries, observatories, and universities, were systematically destroyed in 1221. In Merv, the population was ordered to evacuate and then systematically annihilated in groups outside the city. Modern historians estimate hundreds of thousands perished. After the city of Nishapur rebelled and killed a Mongol general, Genghis Khan's son-in-law, the retribution was particularly severe. The city was utterly razed, with separate mounds, reportedly, made from men, women, and children. Even cats and dogs were killed. The scale of destruction inflicted upon the Khwarezmian Empire was unprecedented, even by the harsh standards of medieval warfare. Historians estimate Persia's population may have declined by as much as 75% in the regions directly affected by the Mongol invasion. The complex irrigation systems that had sustained Persian agriculture for centuries were destroyed, turning once fertile farmlands into desert. Cities that had been intellectual centers for hundreds of years were either entirely abandoned or reduced to small towns. Persian chroniclers captured the psychological impact of this catastrophe in stark, unflinching terms. One wrote, "They came, they destroyed, they burned, they killed, they plundered, they left." Another observed, "If 1,000 years from now the world should produce a monster, he would still be less monstrous than Genghis Khan." The invasion was so traumatic that Persian historians referred to it as a calamity and viewed it as divine punishment for the sins of the Muslim world. Yet, amidst this devastation, glimmers of the more constructive aspects of the future Mongol Empire emerged. Cities that surrendered without resistance, such as Balkh, were typically spared. Genghis Khan showed respect for Islamic religious leaders who approached him peacefully, ordering their religious buildings protected, and despite his fearsome reputation, he maintained absolute control over his forces, with looting and violence following precise strategic objectives rather than descending into chaos. By 1222, much of the Persian campaign was complete. Rather than appointing governors and establishing direct rule, Genghis Khan initially left much of the conquered territory devastated and leaderless as he withdrew the bulk of his forces. Only gradually would Mongol administrators move in to begin reconstruction and governance, a process that would accelerate under his successors. As the main Mongol army returned east, a smaller detachment of approximately 20,000 warriors, led by generals Jebe and Subutai, pushed westward on a reconnaissance expedition. This seemingly modest force swept across the North Caucasus, crushed a combined army of Russian princes and Cumans at the Battle of the Kalka River, and raided across Crimea before rejoining the main army. In 3 years, they completed a circular march of 8,850 kilometers, demonstrating the extraordinary maneuverability of Mongol armies. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire was a turning point in world history. It opened Central Asia and Persia to direct Mongol rule, creating a power vacuum in the Islamic world that would not be filled for generations to come. Refugees streamed in all directions, spreading tales of the invincible horsemen from the east. Among those fleeing the Mongol advance was a young scholar who would later become famous as Nasir ad-Din Tusi, one of the great scientists of the medieval Islamic world. Initially abducted by the assassin sect, he would later serve the Mongols themselves, founding the famous observatory at Maragay under their patronage. This is a small example of how chaos and destruction gave rise to new cultural mixing. For Genghis Khan himself, the Khwarezmian campaign marked the pinnacle of his conquests and a display of strategic vision. Despite being 60 years old, he personally led armies on campaigns spanning thousands of miles across Asia's harsh terrain. He destroyed one of the most powerful empires of the Islamic world in less than 2 years, and sent a clear signal to all rulers: submit or face annihilation. Following the Persian campaign, the Great Khan's attention turned once again to China, where unfinished business remained with the Jin dynasty and Western Xia. But the template for Mongol conquest had already been established. The combination of overwhelming military force, calculated terror, and political pragmatism that would define the empire's future success. The expedition of Jebin Subutai had served as reconnaissance for future invasion. 14 years after Genghis Khan's death, in 1236, the empire was ruled by Ogadai, the third son and chosen successor of the great ruler. Under his leadership, expansion continued relentlessly. The invasion of Europe was entrusted to Batu, son of Jochi and grandson of Genghis Khan, along with the brilliant strategist, Subutai. The army for the Western campaign was not the largest in terms of numbers, approximately 130,000 seasoned and disciplined warriors. Many commanders had received personal training under Genghis Khan in the intricacies of steppe warfare. This was not merely a raid, but a full-scale invasion with the objective of bringing the European kingdoms under the authority of the Great Khan. The invasion began with an assault on Volga, Bulgaria in 1236, quickly subduing the trading state that controlled vital river routes on the Volga and Kama. Following this, the forces divided into multiple columns to systematically subdue the principalities that would later be known as Rus. By then, Kievan Rus was already weakened by internal strife. Prince after prince made the fatal mistake of fighting the invaders alone. The great cities of Rus fell one after another. Ryazan, after a 5-day siege in December 1237, then Vladimir, Suzdal, and dozens of smaller settlements. According to chroniclers, not a single eye was left to weep for the fallen, as the entire population was either annihilated or had fled into the forests. Kiev, the pearl of ancient Rus, fell in December 1240 after a fierce siege. The invaders employed their full arsenal of siege techniques, catapults, mining, psychological warfare. When the city fell, it was so devastated that visitors in subsequent years saw only vast mounds of skulls and bones on the site of the once magnificent city. Moving further west, in early 1241, the Mongol armies were poised to strike the Kingdom of Hungary, one of Europe's strongest and most populous. On the 9th of April 1241, the Battle of Mohi unfolded on the Saho River. The Hungarian army, numbering up to 80,000 men, confronted the eastern forces. Subutai orchestrated an intricate ambush, secretly ferrying part of his troops across a pontoon bridge during the night, while a diversionary attack was directed at the main crossing. As the Hungarian forces concentrated on the obvious defensive position, the Khan's armies crossed by the secret bridge and encircled the European forces. The Hungarians attempted to form a circular defense, but this became a trap. Mongol archers surrounded the dense ranks, peppering them with arrows. As the Hungarians tried to break out, it was discovered that an apparent escape route led directly into a kill zone, where hidden units of heavy cavalry awaited. On that day, an estimated 70,000 Hungarians perished, and Hungary's military might was destroyed overnight. As a result of these victories, the invaders occupied Hungary, raiding into Austria, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Romania. Contemporaries described their arrival as a locust invasion that devastated Eastern Europe. By the end of 1241, the Eastern armies had reached the gates of Vienna and the shores of the Adriatic. Europe seemed on the verge of total conquest by the same force that had already consumed much of Asia. When the Eastern armies in 1242 suddenly withdrew from the borders of Vienna and retreated eastward again, Europe breathed a sigh of relief. But the consequences of these invasions proved far deeper than the short-term terror experienced in those months. The defeated and devastated principalities fell into dependence on the horde for generations to come, and Eastern Europe would not fully recover for centuries after the Mongol invasion. A quarter of Hungary's population perished or was displaced. Many areas lay desolate for years. Amidst the destruction, the foundations of a new world were laid, unprecedented in its scope for trade, cultural exchanges, and travel. The Mongol dominion reached its territorial peak under Mungka, a grandson of Genghis Khan, in the mid-13th century. The empire then stretched from the Korean coast to the Hungarian plains, encompassing northern China, Central Asia, Western Asia, the Caucasus, parts of modern-day Russia, and Eastern Europe. The vast territory was governed not so much by rigid centralized authority, as by a combination of local customs and Mongol bureaucracy. Imperial roads were dotted with yam, postal stations where messengers and merchants could obtain fresh horses, food, and temporary lodging with the aid of special silver tablets. Messengers covered up to 250 miles a day. The system spanned the entire empire, linking nomadic yurts to the markets of Iran and the Far Eastern markets of Ningbo. The rigor of Mongol rule ensured unprecedented security on trade routes during this time. A maiden with gold on her head could travel without fear from one end of the realm to the other, contemporaries testified. The empire granted tax exemptions to artisans and clergy of all faiths. Buddhist monks, Christian missionaries, and Muslim ulema were exempted from levies to encourage the development of culture and knowledge. The Mongols displayed remarkable religious tolerance for their time. Genghis Khan himself stated, "I do not distinguish the merit of one faith over another. I regard all with respect." Such a policy allowed Buddhist lamas, Catholic missionaries, and Muslim scholars to meet and debate on equal footing. Imperial capitals, from Karakoram to Baghdad, were multilingual, thronged with people of the most diverse nationalities. City festivals often turned into debates between representatives of different religions, schools of thought, and crafts. Something that had previously seemed impossible. The great empire not only ensured the military-political unity of Eurasia, but also invigorated the exchange of technologies. Paper money, invented in China, first appeared and became widely distributed within the Mongol Empire, and its model and idea penetrated Persia and other countries, where similar means of payment began to be attempted. Gunpowder and the compass, rolled fabric production, and new types of agricultural crops. These spread along merchant routes from east to west. Marco Polo himself, the famous Venetian, spent 17 years at the court of Kublai Khan, recording enthusiastic descriptions of Chinese cities and the excellent imperial postal service. Such journeys would have been impossible without the era of the Pax Mongolica, unprecedented in scope and stability. The Pax Mongolica allowed the countries of Europe and the East to exchange not only goods but also medical, astronomical, and agro-technical knowledge. Along trade and diplomatic routes, gunpowder, paper, tea, spices, and new fruit varieties penetrated Europe, while Byzantine and European building methods, calculation technologies, and military equipment flowed back. However, it was this same openness that led to the Black Death, the plague, arriving in the West, along the protected roads of the Mongol Empire. The empire faced challenges. New generations of rulers increasingly forgot the harsh steppe traditions in favor of urban pleasures. The followers of Genghis Khan, his grandsons and great-grandsons, grew up not in yurts in the wind, but in palaces surrounded by eunuchs, scholars, and officials. Gradually, the old martial qualities eroded. The principles of unity and discipline that had once allowed the Mongols to conquer the world disappeared. The death of Khan Möngke in 1259 triggered a civil war. Both younger brothers, Kublai and Arikbök, fought for power. Kublai moved the capital to China, founded the Yuan dynasty, and became emperor of the empire's largest and richest province, ruling millions of Chinese. In Persia, Central Asia, and Rus's, independent states emerged. The Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, the Golden Horde, which maintained formal dependence on the Great Khan but in reality pursued an independent policy. The empire was cracking at the seams. Each ulus went its own way. These state formations developed differently. In China, Kublai's reign brought new administrative institutions, a flourishing of theater and literature, the appearance of blue and white porcelain, and achievements in mathematics. In Central Asia and Persia, former local elites were actively involved in governance. Persian and Chinese motifs mingled in architecture. In the Golden Horde, nomadic democracy and typical steppe culture were long preserved. But over time, Islam began to penetrate this ulus as well. Climatic disasters, recurring epidemics, famine, and devastating wars between the descendants of Genghis Khan gradually undermined the foundations of past power. By the early 14th century, the four major Mongol states had effectively become independent. Though they formally recognized the authority of the Great Khan, the unified space began to fragment. Free movement from Japan to Hungary became a thing of the past. Trade routes remained, but they were no longer secured by such strong unity. The seeds of future strife and disintegration were sown during the empire's heyday. After the death of Kublai Khan, the dignity of Khan, and with it the real power within the Mongol realm, was divided among the four great khanates. Each region went its own way, increasingly recognizing the supremacy of the Great Khan. In China, the Yuan dynasty lasted until the mid-14th century, when rebellions, famine, floods, and plague undermined the power of the steppe elites. The last Yuan retreated north, where in the Mongolian steppe arose the so-called Northern Yuan Khanate, still nurturing hopes of regaining lost glory and periodically launching campaigns into China. In Persia, the Ilkhanate, ruled by the descendants of Genghis Khan, disintegrated into dozens of independent states by mid-century after the death of the last Ilkhan without an heir. However, cultural synthesis continued. Persian architecture and literature, having absorbed Eastern features, survived even after Mongol rule. In the Golden Horde, which controlled Ruses and the Western Steppe, the process of ethnic and religious fusion progressed further. Under Berk Khan in the mid-13th century, the Horde's nobility adopted Islam, making this ulus a major player between the Islamic East and the Christian West. Over time, the Horde broke up into the Great Horde, Crimean, Kazan, Astrakhan, and Siberian Khanates. By the 15th century, these states were gradually conquered by Ruses. In 1480, Grand Prince Ivan III refused to pay tribute to the Horde, marking the end of formal Mongol suzerainty. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Ulus split into a western part, integrated into the Muslim world, and an eastern part, which preserved remnants of nomadic culture but was also soon absorbed by new empires. Descendants of Genghis Khan appeared in India. Babur, a direct descendant, founded the imperial Mughal dynasty in 1526, giving the country and its society a unique blend of traditions. In East Asia, the Ming dynasty replaced the Mongol Yuan dynasty, but administrative practices, some economic and political institutions, and at times cultural traditions were preserved. Even after losing power in China, the descendants of Genghis Khan continued wars on the steppes for a long time, and the memory of the great past inspired the nomadic peoples of Asia. The fall of the empire did not mean the disappearance of its mark from the world map. In the languages, traditions, borders, and even genetics of the current peoples of Eurasia, a careful observer will find imprints of Mongol rule. The trade routes, once secured under the protection of the Mongol Empire, in altered form continued to serve as arteries of bread, silk, and knowledge. Traditions of governance, marriage, and diplomatic practices, rooted in the Mongol era, took root over centuries and were passed on to new empires. In the lands of northeast Ruses, a state strengthened, appropriating the monopoly on collecting tribute and administering former steppe lands. In Central Asia, Turkic languages spread, displacing ancient Indo-European dialects. In China, the descendants of Mongol rulers influenced the formation of borders and cultural patterns until the 20th century. Even the biological legacy is exceptionally large. Modern genetic analyses show that up to 6% of men in a vast area from East Asia to Europe carry unique Y chromosomal markers associated with the descendants of Genghis Khan's ruling family, the so-called Genghis Khan effect. In culture, the descendants of the Mongols remain in epics, heroic songs, and tales of many peoples, in the Epic of Jangar, in the musical traditions of Kalmyks and Buryats, in the historical memory of Kazakhs, Tatars, and Bashkirs. The image of the great Khan himself has become controversial. In Mongolia, Genghis Khan is a national hero, the father of the nation. The capital, the airport, and many streets are named after him. In other countries, the memory of the Mongol period is alternately assessed as a tragic rupture and as an era of new opportunities. In the legacy of Genghis Khan and his empire lies the main point. The world invisibly changed. It clashed, merged, and mixed. The border between East and West was erased. Mongolia, once a symbol of nomadic hordes, gifted the world new goods, ideas, and even genes. In the modern world, peoples who once warred or united under the rule of the Mongol dynasty cherish the memory of the past era as a tragedy, as a revelation, as a catastrophe, and as the beginning of a new world. Thus ended the path of a state that began with a small boy, forgotten by his companions in the bare steppe, and grew into a colossal empire. An empire that vanished like morning mist but left its mark on the fates of millions of people and on the entire history of humanity, a trace that will never disappear.